Okay, so first of all, hello everybody, and thank you for letting us have this opportunity of showing our project. I'm not sure if it is the best project to show as the last one, because some things are going to be similar to the ones before, and others may be different also to the things that you usually listen to. I put that the presentation is made by Georg and me and Moncho, because we made it together. Georg Pirker is my colleague that was coordinating this project with me. And he was also the main reason why probably this project got funded, because it was a group of mobilities that was funded by Erasmus Plus here in Germany. But let's go step by step. Steps, survival to kill, or strategies for EDC, Education for Democratic Citizenship, in post-factual societies or populistic societies. We will see all of that. First of all, the therein network, we were saying, is not a very big network. It's a democracy and human rights education network, active in Europe. Right now, 49 organizations in 19 countries, which maybe is 21, because the General Assembly is going to happen in a couple of days. Also 2 European-level organizations. And I think the main interesting thing about the therein network is that it's not only about youth work, it's not only about education. And this means that it's not only an international bubble, like probably this one that we are here, but it's also an intersectional bubble. And that makes the conversations quite interesting for somebody like me, who was coming first only from activism and youth work, and then started doing also education. This diversity means that there are European networks inside the European networks, which lobby for different things, like history teachers. There are education providers in adult education and in public institutions and schools. Like, for example, new one from this year in Poland, CEO, that is the one doing the citizenship education classes for schools in the whole country. Youth work providers, public institutions, like here in Germany, ADB, which is the network of civic education centers providers. And grassroots organizations, like we could say in Portugal, Dinamo, an organization completely made by young people, all of them volunteers, and all of them working for participation in civil society. When we talk more specifically about the therein network in the STEPS project, we have 20 organizations from 13 different countries, and 90% of them have staff. So we are talking about people that are doing youth work and that they are paid for doing youth work in the majority of the cases. This is also relevant because the whole project was funded by Key Action 1 Mobility. We had 4 opportunities to meet each other, and everything else was done with our own resources. So as I was saying, let me take out the hand. Steps, strategies for EDC in P societies. And this is the important thing that started the whole project itself. In 2016, post-truth becomes the word of the year. So we want to do a project to find out what that really means. We start checking what is post-truth, why people talk about fake news, why it's always connected with elections in different countries and Brexit. And we actually realized that when we say post-truth, we are just using another new word to talk about populism and propaganda, which is already interesting, because if we use a new word to talk about something that has a word before, one of the things that we are doing is trying to disconnect it from the connotation that it had before, which for us as educators and youth workers is something not so good, because it means that we will have to think again about the things that 50 years ago maybe they already solved. But the important thing for us is that when we thought more about it, we realized that we were really tackling the topics of disinformation and a deeper polarization in society. So the P went from post-truth to populism, and from populism to polarization. And what we realized is that what usually people were talking about was radicalization and violent extremism. And we were not sure if this is really the main topic that we wanted to tackle. Furthermore, with the steps, we had the main question, how the P, how this populism, how this popularization, how this radicalization is influencing youth work. That was the main question that we had, and this is what I will talk here in the majority of the speech. So the first element that was seen is that there was in society a promotion of mistrust and hate, We were seeing some different social groups and some different political parties promoting violence, mainly verbal, but also there were physical attacks. And there was a continuous questioning on democracy, of the independence of the court, and on independence of media. All of these shifts affect people's trust, especially young people's trust. And this effect on young people's trust, I think, is the main element that we're talking about when we are talking about this polarization and this radicalization. We all know this. We all know why this radicalization and this extremism is happening nowadays. We know the consequences that it's happening, that it's having. But I believe that we still don't know what we can do to counteract it. And one of the reasons is that we are having meetings like this one. And this is very problematic because this also means that we are doing some things wrong. If not, we would already have found the solution. Our process started just with a meeting to define this P and what we wanted to focus on. We've had two different focus groups because DARE organizations were usually working only on policy level. We had experts meeting to talk more about how policy is influencing society and how then policy is influencing society. Then we had also educators meeting to see the role of youth work and education. Putting all the things together, we had a final conference where it's very interesting because the main topic there was resilience, which was one of the keywords here during yesterday and today. And at the end, we had this final publication. This final publication has, as you can see there, 14 country reports. The 13 countries involved, and I think from Estonia, we have two different reports, one coming from university, one coming from education organization. We have free text from different colleagues. We have some methods and approaches in the end, but that's for sure not the most interesting part of the publication. That's just some small detail to connect with educators. And we have the policy recommendations that we built around all of that. I'm not going to be talking about the things on the top, and I'm going to be summarizing some of the policy recommendations. The main thing is that each one of the country report is very specific, and if you're interested, we really recommend you to read them, but it wouldn't make sense that I spend now 1 hour going through them. And the policy recommendations are bringing most of those elements here together. When we were thinking about coming to these talks, we were looking at the participant list, and it was interesting to see representatives of national agencies. The policy recommendations are going for society and youth work, for policy level, and also for the different national levels. So we have focused on this presentation on what can be this policy level, because we believe that we can say some things to the national agencies that at least will open some questions. And one extra point, as we said, the Key Action 1 was only funding the mobilities. All the content was made by the people that were part of the program. The publication was funded by the Ministry of Austria after they saw it in a PDF. We could print it physically. So if some of you would like to have a paper copy of it, I think we could talk and they could be sent from Berlin. Very interesting that our member of DARE in Austria got it through, because we believe that if the government saw what is written there, probably they would not print it. But it's a good practice that now they are advocating for. Anyway, we start talking about the P. We're talking about populism, post-truth, radicalization, all of these keywords. And we know that they are influencing youth work. The way that we believe that they are influencing youth work is that they are shifting the political debate. They are shifting the political debate, first of all, because nationalist parties enter the governments, and they start talking about their own topics, and we follow through. We follow through, sometimes because they do it in a good way, other times just because we react very easily. Like when people throw the stick, we see that the person is throwing the stick, but we go for the stick anyways. And here we have this question inside the network. Yes, we are reacting. Yes, we are focusing now our youth work in something different, but is it really what we want to do? Do we aim at preventing radicalization, mainly for a security perspective, or do we aim at supporting human rights and citizenship? In our case, through education, but in general in society. The answer for us is the first one, but we acknowledge that there is an important challenge, and that's why we were thinking about how to address both topics. Now, something interesting. When we were designing our activities, we were talking about youth work. These keywords here are our definition of what youth work is about, and they are extremely similar to the conclusions that you had of the Offenburg talks of last year. We believe that we want to live in more fair and diverse societies where citizens, which also includes young people, can participate in meaningful ways. For that reason, youth work is supporting that young people have these values that we believe are the right ones, that include human rights, democracy, solidarity. We also acknowledge that youth work is political, supports debate and deliberation. Maybe resilience would be another word to put here, as critical thinking, of course. It aims for democratic self-efficiency. For sure, youth work is an emancipatory process. We don't want to support the empowerment of young people, so we are the one who empower them, which unfortunately is the keyword chosen in the EU Youth Strategy. We believe that empowering keeps on having a connection that in a way we want not to need. We want to support that young people are self-sufficient by themselves, the emancipation of the youth, as every other citizen. And for sure, we believe in this, in diversity, and to put the values into practice. And here is where we have the first main blue text, that for us is one of our conclusions. We need to stop having reactive youth work priorities. If now we are working with a focus on discrimination and on radicalization, and before we were working on asylum seekers and refugees, and before on environmental problems, and before on employability, it's not possible to have long-term processes with these young people. And without long-term processes, it's very difficult to achieve what we believe that youth work wants to achieve. This is the first problem that we faced. A problem that became structural for the organizations in steps, because the first answer, how P is influencing youth work, they don't let us do long-term processes. And some organizations were doing very good actions on climate. There is no funding for them 2 years later, so they cannot continue doing something that was considered first to be innovative and then to be a good practice. And this also connects with another question that we had in the network. When we react to each one of the new priorities that comes, what are we really doing? And to put it in a more controversial statement, who do we want to work with? Do we want to work with the offenders? Do we want to work with the radicalized? Or do we want to work with the victims? Where are we putting the effort? On the radicalized, which is not really the radicalized, is the possible radical? Or is it the rest of society that are being affected by those possible radicals? Also, who are more, the victims or the radicals? When we talk about 1 billion people entering these websites where there are memes, how many of them are just looking at them? How many of them are victims? How many of them are radicals? This is very interesting for us. And it's again when we go to, we need to stop treating youth as potential danger. Youth 10 years ago were future employees. Youth now are a potential problem, but actually youth are citizens. And if we don't treat society as citizens, is when we start having all these problems. Or at least that's what we believe inside the network. Now, we start talking about populism and radicalization, and we see that it overtakes most of the conversation on youth work. And when we start talking about youth work, and we see it especially in our first experts meeting in the STEPS project, we realize that in most of the countries, there is this little conversation that comes up, like the problem is not radicalization, the problem is not the youth, the problem is the system. I know that yesterday this was a controversial topic, so I don't want to go a lot into it, but there is at least one thing that we would like to say, and is that participation, as we say in youth work, is many things more than voting, but we focus a lot first in young people don't vote, and now maybe young people don't vote what we want them to vote. So we are starting to decide which ideologies are okay, based on some elements that may not be the main ones, but are the ones that we follow because of this populism and radicalization. And second, the frame that we have is that citizens are becoming consumers. Society is this time more individualistic, and that may be also influencing how we provide youth work. We talk about clients, we give services. It may not be the best way, but it's the one that we do because this is how the system is working. I mean, that's the clear way to do it. Furthermore, until not too many years, youth work or youth centers or environments for learning were also places where we could challenge the status quo. We could question how things are happening. We could question how society is developing. And now we believe that there is this risk that because of defending society against populism and radicalization, we are also defending what we used to fight against. And this is a question that will come more times. Who is benefiting from these changes? Who really benefits from having a society polarized? Okay, probably the people that are polarizing it, but who is benefiting from trying to mainstream everything again? Who is benefiting from us trying young people to vote again for some parties that before we were questioning? For systemic change, we need to create spaces which allow questioning the status quo. We need to keep on doing that. I think youth are the one that change. But as we said, that is, even for some people, the conspiracy. For some people, the system is very important. As we say that not all young people are radical, we also say that not all politicians are corrupt. So let's leave that topic aside. We go back to youth work. First thing that we talked about, we are subordinating the youth work field for the sake of prevention. The youth work field, and we put there non-existing. We have to also be realistic that in many countries in the European context, not only European Union, but also, the youth field is something very fragile, and that every year is being more damaged in the last decade at least. We are also jeopardizing open and free learning environments that support youth gaining democratic self-confidence. This is a question that we had in STEPS. What is really a democratic space? What is nowadays a free space? Is it a park? Is it a library? Are we creating those spaces? Are we allowing our youth centers where maybe less people go to be open and democratic places? Is the internet another of those spaces that we still don't know how to make free, open, and democratic? This is a question still also for us because I believe that with this project we didn't have the competence and the time to deeply analyze it, but we acknowledged that we have a problem that spaces are not free anymore. We are more, even here, talking about setting boundaries, and probably that also means censorship, than about allowing freedom of speech and different perspectives. And finally, connected with these two, we are losing capacity of NGOs. We can put examples in our network. We have an organization working on civic education in Trento. In the last 3 years, they have lost 60% of their funding from the government for working on youth work, on citizenship education. We have a member in the Czech Republic that this project started in 2017. So in 2016, one day they went back to the office and they had a puppet hung in their door because they were working with immigrants before working with them. These things are really influencing how people are seeing youth work. The way that we are doing youth work is probably also supporting this influence, and we can really say that youth work is in danger. Putting all of this together, what do we recommend? First, innovation. Let's stop talking about innovation, please. We are doing then the same that they are doing to us with the priorities. If always we have to do something innovative, we will never develop that innovation. And there are already plenty of good practices. Furthermore, especially when we talk about radicalization, there are many good things that happen ad hoc, that have very high quality, that in very short time they started to be implemented, and that they are working good. I go back to my first slide. We say, we know the problem, we know why it happens. We have, in local level, some tools and some good approaches to stop radicalization, to allow pluralism, to allow consensus. Maybe we have to find a way to support that those activities or those processes or those methodologies reach other places and they can be used in long term. So yeah, there is no lack of information anymore. That also we said it during the last day. We need to learn how to navigate that information. So maybe we also can say that there is no lack of resources. Instead of asking to create more, we have to find a way to point out which are the good ones, point out which are the ones that can be multiplied, taken to more contexts, or just visualized as the good practices. Then youth work lobby. Yeah, this is something that we also realize talking with our members. We already said many of the things right now. We have a problem in the organizations that not enough knowledge is coming to them, and they are always being asked to do more different things. So we believe that organizations doing youth work need to develop awareness and to get sensitive of the political frame and the step to talk. Youth work is political. We know it. Youth work is also connected with policy. And maybe we don't know it that. We saw it in the network. We saw it talking with other organizations in the national levels. They are only doing this reactive local work, which is good, which is needed, but it is one of the many elements. If we are not able to connect with the policies, if we are not able to also talk with the decision makers, youth work is only going in one direction. So maybe we don't have to influence only from the national agencies down, but we have to help the organizations influencing higher than the national agencies to our commission and different institutions. So we have also policies that support the people implementing. Talking about it and talking about good practices, we want to talk about two projects that are already happening in European level, that we believe that they are a good example to continue developing and going through. The first one is Youth for Human Rights. Why we believe that Youth for Human Rights can be useful? From one side, it connects youth work with social work. And this is something that we saw very interesting. There is this problem inside the youth work field that we heard sometimes, that youth work doesn't have the same recognition, non-formal education doesn't have the same recognition. Then we thought, why do we keep on separating? If we want youth work to have the same recognition in some context as social work, why do we separate it? Let's keep on building the connections. Remember that young people are citizens, that young people, as soon as they stop being young, they will need also a social worker if they don't go out of their situation. So let's keep on connecting youth work with social work. And let's connect those processes with human rights education and citizenship education, because we go back to what is youth work. And then we want to support that young people are active citizens. So we have a very good example on what is citizenship education doing. We connect this with this crisis that happened in the Council of Europe with lack of funding because of Russia leaving. It was very sad for us in the therein network, because we saw that there was this huge campaign from the youth department about keeping the funding for youth. But the funding for youth was going to be cut, as well as the funding on remembrance and the funding on human rights education. It would be much easier to connect all these networks that we're going to lose the funding and us together that it stays, instead of fighting separate wars. And I think this is a big problem that we have. Like, we are finding separate wars. There is many people doing youth work that they will never say that they are doing education. There are many people doing youth work and education that they will never say that they are working on human rights education. And then projects that are exactly the same are happening with funding from the three different places, but different organizations and institutions. We are just replicating work with different perspectives that, if they join together, could have a higher impact. And finally, we have the example of Europe Goes Local. But I'm not sure if I'm talking here specifically about Europe Goes Local or about a bigger problem that we see in the youth field. I also don't know if it's only from our context, but there are many organizations that are sustaining all their local youth work through international projects, especially because many countries don't have any local or national means of support. This is a huge problem that needs to be acknowledged. We know the official answer, a Key Action 1 or a mobility is a project that only supports the expenses of that mobility. But we also know from many cases that this is not true. Many organizations are using these mobilities to pay also with the leftover money their employees or their volunteers, because they cannot be employees because it's not enough anyways, or to sustain their local level activities. If we know that this is happening, probably we need to stop saying that the funding is not for that. believe that this is very important. Furthermore, we believe that the quality of the international mobilities would be much higher if a youth worker would have enough funding, maybe from Europe, because they don't have it from local level, to do ongoing long-term youth work with the young people and only do the international mobilities that are necessary to those needs. This is interesting for us because we saw these serial project managers that are offering always different projects, always going to the new priorities, very good, doing what is considered to be innovation in most of the funding schemes of not only Erasmus, but also other programs and foundations. And those people are not really doing youth work. So probably the money may be going in the wrong direction. If we put the example of our STEPS publication, we were asked, okay, but you did something with high quality. Why didn't you ask for more funding, like in Erasmus Plus, the Key Action 2? First of all, because we would not have been accepted, because we had a partnership of 20 organizations, and those type of projects are for 5 or 6. And second, because we didn't need so much. For doing this publication, we only needed some funding for the local research, maybe, which ended up being articles, because we couldn't spend more time on the research, some funding for the publication, and maybe would have included some local level activities with the young people themselves, instead of working only in the level of administration. This was us in the project, but in general in the field, there are many countries where many organizations also need to have this possibility of doing local youth work, instead of doing only international projects to finance themselves. So is this remark, without Erasmus Plus, no youth work or EDCHRE structures in each time more countries would be possible. This is something to have into consideration and to think about how much we prefer funding international mobility and this feeling of Europe, or funding youth work, and that every country is able to do their work. Thank you very much.